Interestingly enough, I've started getting requests about next year's class, and I'm trying to figure out the dates on that because the holidays come relatively early in the year, in the secular year in September, and they're all on Wednesdays. So I'm trying to figure out how we get all that done, and it's just not going to work. But anyway, just real quickly, excuse me. The Chumash. All right, we are drawing to a close to the book of Leviticus, Sefer Vayikra. Last week we had the Parsha of Emor, which included about a listing of the holidays. And this week we will be reading the double portion of Bahar B'chukotai. As I mentioned before, that in a leap year we end up having extra Shabbatot, extra Saturdays in the Hebrew calendar. And so in order to have a Torah portion for every Shabbat, we have some of them are together in a non-leap year. And in a leap year, they would be separated. So Bahar B'chukotai, which are together this year, next year, I believe, are going to be separated because next year is going to be a leap year. We'll have 2 months of Adar. Means Pesach will be much later than it was this year. So we will have them split up. So Bahar opens up talking about the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year. The land is left fallow every 7 years. And every 50th year, they have a special celebration of the Jubilee year. All slaves are supposed to be freed. Land's supposed to return to the ancestral patrimony. Every 7 years, the Hebrew slave is freed. Today, it's still a question of how to properly observe the sabbatical year, because it is still observed on some level in the land of Israel. And there's a difference of opinion as to the nature of the observance. Is the nature of the observance still based upon simply the biblical law and all the biblical rules then apply? Or is it more of a rabbinic enactment as kind of a memorial to the sabbatical year system? Because without the temple, without the rituals around that, and not being able to have the Jubilee year, so that lands return to the ancestral ownership, a lot of rabbis said the Jubilee year system with the sabbatical years doesn't apply. But it only applies on rabbinic level. Others say, no, it still applies. Now, what's the major difference is that the law is land is supposed to be left fallow. You're not supposed to plow, harvest, fix your property up for the year. Well, in a modern world, in farm situations they have today, that's very difficult. So Rabbi Isaac Cook, who was the first chief rabbi of then Palestine, back to the early part of the 20th century, he made a ruling that you could do with the land just like we do with chametz on Passover. That the Jewish-owned land would be sold to a Gentile, and then the farmers would be working the Gentiles' land, and since it's only a rabbinic enactment, that would allow for farming to take place and for the farmers to be able to manage economically. Not everyone agrees with that, and so as what else is new, you have fights in Israel over the nature of the sabbatical year. This year is still not yet one, so we don't have to worry about it with us. But one of the things that we are told was that in everyone, as I said, was supposed to go back to the original ownership, and slaves who were redeemed, houses redeemed, all kinds of things of that nature that are explained in this section. And the last Torah portion of the book of Leviticus, Sefer Vayikra, B'chukotai, Im b'chukotai talechu et mitzvotai tishmoru v'asitem otam. If you will follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant you your rains and their seasons, so the earth shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field their fruit. So we are closing off with the book of Leviticus, Sefer Vayikra, with a series dealing with blessings and curses. If you obey the law and follow where you're supposed to, everything will go well with you. If not, then oy favoy, as they say in Yiddish, you will have lots of tsuras, lots of difficulties. And there are a few other various laws here, and then we finish the portion of Bechukotai and finish the book of Leviticus. So that next week we will start Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, the story of the wandering in the wilderness. That's why it's called Bamidbar, because while it doesn't really explain everything in the 40 years, the time period that is actually covered is almost 40 years, because that's when Israel sins and doesn't want to go to conquer the land when they were told by God to do so. And therefore they're forced to remain wandering in the Midbar for a total of 40 years until the generation of the slaves is gone and a new generation has come in who will be capable of meeting up the needs of conquering the land of Israel, the land of Canaan at that time. All right. We're in a couple of weeks, we will have finished counting the Omer, right? We will reach the 49th day of the Omer, and then will come the 50th day, which is actually the holiday of Shavuot. Shavuot, and the name comes from the idea that we count 7 weeks until we reach the holiday of Shavuot. Shavuot is a week, Shavuot, the plural weeks. And it's also called, not Jews don't refer to it this way, but it is also called Pentecost because it's 5 weeks. Penta for the meaning the 5 or 50 days. Right? 5 weeks, 50. No, I say 5 weeks. 50 days of leading up to the holiday. Shavuot is also called Chag HaBikurim, the holiday of the first fruits, because people would bring the offerings and the new fruit to the temple in Jerusalem. And it was a festive occasion. It's one of the Shalosh Regalim, one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals that at least the males of Israel were supposed to gather at the Beit HaMikdash, at the temple. The rabbis, although the Torah itself never makes clear that this is the reality, but the rabbis looking at the time sequencing in the Torah understood that Shavuot, since we're counting from Pesach, also was the time of giving of the Torah. That is the time that Moses goes up on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai, and receives the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, and then returns and stays up there for 40 days and nights, receiving the rest of the Torah. So, you know, the various holidays, when we mention them in the prayers, have their particular terminology for it. So Chag HaPesach, the holiday of Pesach, is also Chag Matzot, the holiday of the Matzot. Zman Cherutenu, the time of our granting of freedom from the bondage. Zman Cherutenu. The holiday of Shavuot, the rabbis call Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of giving the Torah. And there's a very fascinating midrash that builds upon the wording, I believe I shared it with you before, that Israel the people of Israel stood at the foot of the mountain when Moses went up to receive the Torah. In Hebrew, you would say "Tachtit ahar," at the literally it's at the bottom of the mountain or under the mountain. You know, it really is just a place. The mountain's up here, so you're down here. You're at the bottom. But the rabbi's always sensitive to language, saying no. The Midrash says that God picks up the mountain and holds it over Israel and says, if you accept my Torah, well and good. If not, this will be your grave. I'll drop the mountain on top of you. So Israel accepts the Torah. Well, it's not a very voluntary way to accept something. You know, do it or I'll kill you is not exactly the best way of creating a relationship. And the rabbis say that later on in the story of Esther, Israel receives the Torah again, as it were, tells God that they will obey everything that he's told them voluntarily. But there's also another midrash that is associated with the holiday, we'll come to. That is that Israel is supposed to be ready in the morning to receive the Torah, and they overslept. People didn't get up on time. Nothing. We don't do that today. I haven't gotten up on time since before this pandemic. Anyway, so to make up for it, they derived a tradition, especially in Kabbalistic circles, of spending the night of Shavuot, the first night, all night long, studying Torah until the earliest time that you can daven in the morning, and then people would daven in the morning and then go home and collapse. So there's now become a very widespread custom, and I'm sure with the reality that we're facing right now here in Canada, there will probably be those who will have broadcast their tikkun, if they have a tikkun or Shavuot on Zoom or what have you. In years past, when I had a shul, what we did was we started earlier, before Shavuot began, we started studying, then we had dinner, and then we would do some more studying till midnight, so at least we got some in that way. But there are others who start their study sessions after dinner, and they'll go all night long. And you know, you can see the connection of study, of learning of the Torah. Another custom that is widely associated with the holiday of Shavuot is the eating of dairy foods. And normally, Jewish tradition is very adamant. You know, it says in the Talmud, "Ein simcha ela b'basar v'yayin." There's no real simcha without meat and wine. And that was certainly the normative practice, that if you're really going to celebrate something, you have to have your meat. And then wine, of course, they have for the kiddush, etc. So today, it is a large spread custom that many people will have dairy for celebrating the holiday. That is my customs. We have dairy meals. It's nice for a change for the holiday. However, some who are very adamant, and it says in the Talmud, there's "Ein simcha ela b'basar v'yayin." You can't have simcha without meat and wine. So what they do, which is what my oldest son does, is they'll have a dairy kiddush, make a break, and then go to their meat. So you can have both fulfilled that way. And of course, the Shavuot is 2 days, right? Just like we've mentioned all the time before. All of the holidays, they have a second day because of the galut, of living in the diaspora. And so too with the holiday of Shavuot. And because we're supposed to count Chamishim Yom, 50 days, many are very careful not to start the holiday until after sunset. Often we start earlier, but on Shavuot especially, there's also this custom of making sure that you don't start early. Sorry, I'm losing my voice, and I got a lot to do tonight. Because one of the other customs that is associated with Shavuot is the reading of the book of Esther, Megillat Esther. We've mentioned before that there are 5 Megillot, 5 books of the Bible that are called scrolls, Megillot. Each one of them is associated or read on one of the holidays.
Ruth.
Yeah, what did I say?
Esther.
No, I was going to. Megillat Esther is read on Purim. Shir HaShirim is read on Pesach. Megillat Ruth is read, the book of Ruth is read on Shavuot. Eicha Lamentations is read on the 9th of Av. And Ecclesiastes, Kohelet is read on the Sukkot time. Usually the Shabbat, intermediate Shabbat of Sukkot, for those places that follow that custom. Why is Ruth chosen to be read on this holiday? There are a couple of answers. One of them, it relies on the fact that there's a mention of the barley harvest, which at this time of year was part and parcel of the agricultural life of Israel. And so therefore it fits in very appropriately at this time of year. Secondly, Megillat Ruth tells about a woman who joins the Jewish people, a Gioret. She's a convert to Judaism. And as we go through the story, I'll explain how the rabbis understood that and related to it. But the rabbis also said that in essence, when Israel received the Torah at Sinai, all of the Jewish people, all B'nai Yisrael, all of the descendants of Jacob, Israel, became Jewish. Because what are the 3 elements of conversion to Judaism? We understand it as circumcision, going to the mikveh, and the acceptance of the mitzvot. Obviously, women don't have to be circumcised, right? But those 3 elements appear in association with the receiving of the Torah. So when Israel received the Torah, they went to the mikveh, they cleansed themselves, ready for the 3rd day. The men had been circumcised, and they accepted the Torah, just like any convert is supposed to accept the Torah in order to enter into the people of Israel. And so since Ruth was originally not Jewish, and she becomes part of the Jewish people, very clearly you can see how that would be associated then with the holiday of Shavuot and the giving of Torah and Israel's receiving the Torah. Now, Ruth is not really given us, the book of Ruth, Megillat Ruth, doesn't really identify completely when it takes place. It says at the very beginning, Vayihi mimei shvot hashoftim, during the days that the judges ruled over Israel. So it's sometime between the life of Joshua, after Joshua dies, and before Samuel comes to the fro. Later on, we are also given some genealogies that also plays into that timeline, a very important genealogy, the genealogy of David, King David. And so we see it as coming at that point in time. Since it's one of the Megillot in the Jewish Bible, in the Tanakh, it's always found in the book of writing, in the last section, the writings, along with the other 4 Megillot. However, in many Christian Bibles, it will be found before the book of Samuel, I believe. And a note here. Between Judges and Samuel, yeah. In a lot of Christian Bibles, that's where they place the book of Ruth. But we find it in the Megillot. And so we'll go along here and go through the entire book tonight because I think it's a important exercise, and I enjoy it. Hope you get something out of it. All right. The story, now, as you said, we were introduced as the days they translate the word shoftim as chieftains, ruled. So there's a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons were named Machlon and Chilion, Ephrates of Bethlehem in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there. Now, in those first few lines, a lot is being packed into it. We're given a generous kind of idea when it takes place during the time of the Shoftim. We are told the location where the family comes from. Bethlehem is very much associated with King David. And in Christian tradition, that's why Jesus has to be born in Bethlehem, because of that idea of the Davidic lineage that the Christians say was assumed by Jesus, assumed to come to Jesus. All right, so that tells us, sets the scene, what city is taking place. Secondly, we're given all the names. It will come as no surprise to you, because we've seen before that wives are often not mentioned by name in the biblical account. Sorry, ladies, but if you're not the main character, you didn't get a name. You're one of the bit players. If you get a name, then you have to have a higher salary for your pay for the play. All right. But it's clear that there's a desire to make known, as we'll see, that the woman Naomi, which means pleasantness, and that we'll play on that a little bit later in the story, is integral to the story. As a matter of fact, the males in the book of Ruth are all secondary. Megillat Ruth really tells the story of Ruth and Naomi. They're the main characters of the whole story. Furthermore, they're called Ephrates of Bethlehem, and there's a whole literature. What does that mean, that they were Ephrates? They came originally from Ephraim to live in Bethlehem. That's neither here nor there for us to worry about. But then they go to Moab. You have to understand, Moab was considered to be the worst of the enemies of Israel. I'm going to be drinking a lot because my throat's a little dry tonight. When Israel's coming up from the Midbar, from the wilderness, to go make its way to Eretz Yisrael, they asked the Moabites to let them cross through, and they refused to let them go through. And there's the Bible is that more or less curses the Moabites, and says that that a Moabite cannot enter into the congregation of Israel, which means a Moabite cannot convert to Judaism. And Moab is, according to the Bible, descendant of Lot. The famous story of Lot and his 2 daughters, in which the daughters fear the whole world has gone kaput, and they get their father drunk, and they lay with him, and they become pregnant, and they are thus the ancestors of Moab, which is related to Israel, but was a very much a hated enemy of Israel, and it was the geopolitical realia of the time of King David, earlier King Saul, was difficulties between Israel, Judah, Israel, and Moab on the political side of things. So, furthermore, with Elimelech, he's called a man of Bethlehem. Ish, I don't have the Hebrew here. Ish mi Beit Lechem. Ish usually means not simply a man. It usually is used as meaning an important personality. So it's understood that he was an important person. So there's a famine, and instead of staying around helping out, he leaves. And he leaves to go to Moab. Also, we're told the names of the sons, and the sons' names, Machlon and Chilion, have meanings too. And they both mean destruction, being destroyed, dying. Sick, Machlon means sickness, and Chilion may mean consumptive or destroyed. Okay, so that's not a very good name to have. And we'll see that in the Bible, names are always important. They help spell out your what's going to happen to you, your future. So Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. Okay, so the two sons marry Moabite women. That's a big no-no, at least it seems to be. We're not told anything about conversion. But that's there. So they're there 10 years. I don't know how long the famine lasted. We'll see. It's gone by towards the point of this story. But anyway, they stay there. And what happens? Both sons die. Machlon and Chilion die. So the woman was left without her two sons and without her husband. And now you will remember that in the ancient world, that's a very precarious circumstance. A woman in that time was either protected by her father in being part of her father's family, or she's protected by being part of her husband's family. A single woman was at distinct disadvantage in society on all levels. There's nothing to do with our desires, our feelings about that. That was a reality. When the Bible speaks, the Torah speaks of the weak who need our help, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Those are always regarded as the most defenseless members of society, requiring our aid and help. So what happens? She started out with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. For in the country of Moab, she had heard the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. Accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and they set out on the road back to the land of Judah. Okay, so she and her two daughters-in-law start this journey going back to Judah, to Bethlehem. But Naomi said to her two daughters, "Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband." And she says, look, go home, go back to your families. God willing, you'll find the nice boychik, and you'll get married, and you'll have children and all those good things to take care of you. But she says, go back to your family. So again, on the question of conversion, was she sending them back to be idolaters? So that's an issue there as well. And who are their families? Well, the Midrash wants to say that they're important people. That's always the case in the Midrash. The rabbis in the Midrash always want to make our heroes and heroines have important elements, so they want to say that they were actually daughters of the king of Moab. And so we don't, but the text itself doesn't say that. All right, so she says, go back, girls, go back. And she kissed them farewell. They broke in weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." Again, language is very important here. It's not our people, your people. Okay? So Ruth and Orpah say, "No, we'll go with you. We're going to stick around with you." They're acting like very nice daughters-in-law. But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you?" Now, I'm going to have to take a quick side trip here. The Torah says that when a man dies without offspring, his widow is supposed to marry one of his brothers so they can have children with the brother's lineage and property. So Naomi is saying, I haven't got anybody for you. I have no sons who can marry you. Turn back, my daughters, for I'm too old to be married. I don't know how old she was, but so she's probably, 35, 36. She's too old to get married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight, and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you, on their account, debar yourselves from marriage? You're going to wait 12, 13 years to get married again? Oh, no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord is struck out against me. Okay, so she makes a big case that they should go back, go home. They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell. Now, the name Orpah also is related etymologically to Oref, the back of the neck. She turns her back on Naomi in the end. Now, again, we're looking at it simply on the very straightforward level of the story. Naomi's been urging this. You can't really find fault with Orpah for doing that. Right? But nonetheless, the rabbis are not happy with that because what happens? Naomi says goodbye, Orpah says goodbye, but Ruth sticks with her. So when you compare the two daughters-in-law, Orpah comes out lacking. All right? So the Hebrews also, Ruth dovka ba, Ruth clung to her. The word devek, dalet bet kuf, is the same word we use in modern Hebrew for glue. It means to stick. All right, so she's stuck with Naomi. Now, what's going to follow is one of the most famous passages in this book. And the King James language of it is very pretty. But I've got the JPS is not quite as beautiful. But so she says, so they broke and weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, see, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law. But Ruth replied, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her, and the two went on until they reached Bethlehem. Now, it's a very, strong statement that Ruth makes. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Where you're buried, I would be buried. Your God is my God. I'm not going to go back to the pagan gods. So the rabbi see in this at least a statement of conversion. Whether or not there's an actual official conversion is clearly not the case. But she here accepts being part of Naomi's family, Naomi's people, Naomi's life. All right? Now the rabbis, as I said, saw in Ruth the example of the righteous convert. And they have this interchange between Ruth and Naomi. They add parts into it. Let me see if I can find it here. Where is it? But Ruth says, this is in Rashi's commentary, don't try and get me to leave you, to go away from you, because she's determined to convert. So Naomi says, God has commanded us to observe the Sabbaths and the holidays, that we should not go outside 2,000 amot beyond our homes. Tchum Shabbat, one of the laws of Shabbat, not supposed to go out in 2000. So Ruth says back, where you go, I will go. I will follow that rabbinic ruling, which probably hasn't come into being yet, but that's irrelevant. Amra Naomi. Naomi said to her, Nitztavenu shelo leishen yachdav im hagvarim. She says, we've been commanded not to be alone with a man who's not our husband. Amra Ruth says, where you live, stay, I will stay. In other words, I'm not going, I'll follow that ruling. Naomi says to her, we've been commanded to observe 613 mitzvot. Taryag mitzvot, the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. Ruth said, all that you warned me about, I will observe them. Just like the people have done before. Naomi says, we've been commanded not to worship idols. Ruth says to her, your God will be my God. I think that's enough. No, so it goes on. So Amra Naomi says, we have 4 methods of execution for sinners. Skila, Hera, Srefa, H. She goes through this listing about the death penalty and what are the methodologies of imposing that death penalty. So Ruth says, wherever you die, I shall die. All right? If that's the law, that's, I accept myself. So Naomi says, we have our own cemeteries. Ruth says, and that's where my grave will be. So don't, enough already. So at least in spirit, the rabbis clearly see that Ruth is taking upon herself to live as a Jew. However it was understood then. Remember, the rabbis are reading it certainly more than 1,000 years later. So, and they're certainly reading it in rabbinic eyes, and that's why some of this comes from their vision of it. But it does show that Ruth is accepting to be part and parcel of Naomi's family and people, whatever that meant in those days, in terms of an actual conversion. So they go on till they reach Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. What kind of, small towns, Naomi's come back. The women said, can this be Naomi? Can this woman who looks like she suffered so much over the last dozen years, really be Naomi who left? Do not call me Naomi, she replied. Call me Mara, bitter. Not pleasant, but bitter. For Shaddai, God has made my lot very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi, pleasant, when the Lord has dealt harshly with me? When Shaddai the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law, Ruth the Moabite. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, as mentioned earlier. Okay. Now, later on in rabbinic understanding, one is not supposed to remind a convert that they are a convert. Not observed 100% because of certain issues, but once you're a Jew, you're a Jew. The story of Ruth, you'll see constantly, her identity is Ruth the Moabite, not Ruth the daughter of Naomi, but Ruth the Moabite. Because, as we'll see, there's an issue about her parentage coming from Moab. How can she marry a nice Jewish boy? Because the understanding is that Moabites cannot marry into the Jewish people. They cannot convert to being Jewish. So that is a question that is emphasized, pointed out constantly, banged upon in the story. And we'll see when it's not necessary. Nonetheless, that's what she is called. So, chapter 2. Now, Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Now, remember, there is this idea of family stepping in when there's a widow and the husband dies without children. So keep that in the back of your mind. That's something that's going to play here. Secondly, actually, we just read about it last week, that when we harvest our fields, we have to leave the corners unharvested. When we gather in the crop, if we drop something, one sheaf, a little bit, we have to leave it for the poor to come along and glean it, to pick it up after us and take it home for them. So that's background here. It's a barley harvest. So Ruth and Naomi have got nothing. Apparently the home family homestead was still there. So they're living there. And we're introduced to Boaz. The rabbis connect Boaz with other people. We're going to skip over that though. All right, so now Ruth the Moabite. Again, we have, the author. We don't know who wrote the book. The author, according to rabbinic tradition, was the prophet Samuel. But in any case, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, I would like to go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone who may show me kindness. Yes, daughter, go, she replied. Interesting, she says daughter. So it can be simply a statement. It was the other people, sometimes, an older person said a younger person, daughter. But here it seems to be Naomi means more than that. She's treating her really, that there's a special relationship that they now have. Yes, daughter, go, she replied. She went off. She came and gleaned in a field behind the reapers, and as luck would have it, it was a piece of land belonging to Boaz, who was of Elimelech's family. Now, the straightforward reading is just by chance, the field that Ruth came to happened to be one of the fields of Boaz. And of course, the rabbis say nothing happens by chance. This was all divine intervention, whatever. But in any case, so she ends up at his field. All right. Presently Boaz arrived from Bethlehem. You have the towns, and outside of the towns is where they have the fields. Boaz is obviously a wealthy man. He probably has many fields, and he has lots of people who take care of his fields. So he slept late, had a late brunch, and probably bagels and lox, what have you. And then he went out in the field to see what's going on. He greeted the reapers. The Lord be with you. By the way, in Hebrew, it's the name of God. Yud Hey Vav Hey is what is used here. In all expectation is probably at that point in history, they would use God's name in a greeting. Not the way we today would say Hashem, the name. Okay. And they responded, the Lord bless you. Boaz said to the servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose girl is that? He sees Ruth. He doesn't know her. He's a big shot in Bethlehem. He knows everybody. Who's this girl? Also, now listen to the language. It's whose girl is that? She must belong to somebody. And again, it's just the historical reality here is that she's got to be somebody's daughter, somebody's wife, some kind of connection. She can't be just by herself, as it were. The servant in charge of the reapers replied, she is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. In case you didn't know it, she's a Moabite. And in case you didn't know what a Moabite was, somebody who came from the country of Moab. It's like it hammers it constantly, hammers this home. And I'll explain, I think, a little bit more about that when we finish going through the whole book. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been on her feet ever since she came this morning. She has rested but little in the hut. She's working hard. She doesn't take a rest. She doesn't even take a coffee break. She has been busy gleaning behind the reapers after she asked permission. She was polite on top of that. Okay. Boaz said to Ruth, did I skip a line? Boaz said to Ruth, listen to me, daughter. Again, that term of endearment. Here it could just mean, just being nice. Don't go to glean in another field. Don't go elsewhere, but stay here close to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field they are reaping and follow them. I've ordered the men not to molest you. And when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water the men have drawn. So he says to her, look, stay here where you'll be safe. Follow my girls who are doing the reaping. I've warned the men not to bother you, which means obviously she could be endangered for that sort of thing. And not only that, he gives her permission to drink the water that they drew from the wells to have for them to drink. She prostrated herself with her face to the ground and said to him, why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner? Boaz said in reply, I've been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and came to a people who had not known before. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. All right? And the expression under the wings of God, is it? Ruth, is it? Yeah, it says l'chasot tachet knafav. It literally means to come under the wings of God as a divine, like a bird would shelter its chicks, spreads its wings over them to make sure they're okay. So too God, as we talk modern terminologies, tachet kanfei hashchina, under the wings of the divine presence. And everybody who converts to Judaism has come under the wings of the divine presence, tachet kanfei hashchina. Right? And once again, he emphasizes that she has come to join with Naomi's people and his God and her God. All right, so at mealtime, which is probably late afternoon, Boaz said to her, come over here and partake of the meal and dip your morsel in the vinegar. They used to dip the bread or whatever bread they had, often in the vinegar as a kind of flavoring. So she sat down beside the reapers. He handed her roasted grain and she ate her fill and had some left over. When she got up again to glean, Boaz gave orders to his workers. You are not only to let her glean among the sheaves without interference, but you must also pull some stalks out of the heaps and leave them for her to glean and not scold her. He says, she has the right, and I'm telling you to let her collect anything that drops as you're harvesting. You know what, guys, gals? Make sure you drop a little extra for her so that she has more to take home with her. So again, he's showing her kindness. She was kind, and her kindness to Naomi is coming back to her through the kindness of Boaz. She gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned. It was about an ephah of barley. That's a good amount. And carried it back with her to the town. When her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, maybe turn it down a little bit, what she had gleaned, and when she also took out and gave her what she left over after eating her fill, she brought home a doggy bag, all right, for Naomi. So left over from lunch, so she brought a little bit back for Naomi. Mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? How are you so fortunate? Where did you work? Blessed be he who took such generous notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law whom she had worked with, saying, the name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord who has not failed in his kindness to the living or to the dead. For Naomi explained to her daughter-in-law, the man is related to us. He is one of our redeeming kinsmen. He's one of the people, I keep trying to adjust this camera here, one of the people who have the right to redeem the property And if you are related to someone who dies without heirs, members of the family are supposed to redeem or have the first rights of redeeming that property. Mhm. Ruth the Moabite said, he even told me to stay close by my workers until all the harvest is finished. And Naomi answered her daughter-in-law Ruth, it is best, daughter, that you go out with his girls and not be annoyed in some other field. So she stayed close to the maidservants of Boaz and gleaned until the barley harvest and the wheat harvest were finished. Then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law. Okay, so when the harvest season is over in August, in early September, whatever, more or less, she then takes a break. But every day, except Shabbos, she was out gleaning the fields. And they were all Boaz's fields. Chapter 3. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her daughter, I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. What Jewish mother doesn't want the kinder to have a nice spouse? Now, there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you are close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. If you've ever been to desert country, in Israel, in Bethlehem is exactly that kind of country. At night, you generally have a fairly strong breeze coming in because of the nature of the heat differential and cooling off, what have you. And so you've got all this grain that you've harvested over the harvest season. You have to thresh it, and then you have to winnow it. How do you winnow it? Well, one way is you toss it up in the air. And if you got a good strong wind, if it's already been threshed so that the chaff is broken, and when you throw it all up, the lighter chaff blows away and the heavier seeds come down. So this usually took place in the evening, okay, because that was when the winds would come up. And if you've been to Israel, you go to Israel, go to the Negev area, you'll see exactly that's at night it starts to get cold because of the winds that come up. So she says, he's going to be winnowing there tonight. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what you are to do. She replied, I will do everything you tell me. Okay. It's a little strange and somewhat ambiguous. Now, it could simply mean, as one of my commentaries in English said, that Ruth should uncover a place at Boaz's feet and lie down. The word feet, however, may also be a euphemism for sexual organs. In this case, Naomi may have a bolder and less respectable act in mind. Similarly, the verb lie down, which appears 8 times in this chapter, may be a euphemism for sexual relations. The frequent use of the verb to know also contributes to the sexual innuendo. Most commentators agree that sexual intercourse did not actually take place, though several suggested that they were awakening from a drunken stupor after a long day's work. Right? So there may be something else going on here. And also notice, as the rabbis do, the order that Naomi gives of the order of the dress. She says, bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down. Okay, so get all ready at home, get all dressed up, get your perfume on, have your bath, then you get your perfume on, get your nice clothes, and go down. So she went to the threshing floor and did as her mother-in-law instructed her. Boaz ate and drank, it may have been a lot because they're celebrating, and in a cheerful mood went to lie down beside the grain pile. All right. She went over stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. I'm missing something here. Oh, I'm sorry. So she went down to the threshing floor And then it says he did just as the mother-in-law had instructed her. In other words, she got dressed up, bathed, anointed, or at least got dressed up only when she got to the threshing floor. She didn't want to walk around and give people the wrong impression that something's going on. What's she all dressed up like that for? Where's she going? So quietly and stealthily she goes, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back. There was a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. And she replied, I am your handmaid, Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman. This is obviously a sign of relations, whether it's physical relations, but certainly of taking her under his wing as part of his home, his life. He exclaimed, be blessed of the Lord, daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, in that you have not turned to younger men, whether poor or rich. So he says, the fact that you've picked me out, and obviously he's an older man. He's not a youngster. And she preferred him over anybody else. And she could have gone after a young rich guy. Why is she going after an old rich guy? All right. Now, daughter, have no fear. I will do in your behalf whatever you ask. For all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. But while it is true I am a redeeming kinsman, there's another redeemer closer than I. Stay for the night. Then in the morning, if he will not act as a redeemer, good. If he will act as a redeemer, good, let him redeem. But if he does not want to act as redeemer for you, I will do so myself. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. Okay, so Boaz says to her, I will do what you say, but note there is somebody else who takes precedence over me. And if he wants to take care of everything, gesundheit, all the best. If he doesn't, then I will step in. So now go to sleep. So she lay at his feet until dawn. She rose before one person could distinguish another, for he thought, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. He says, we don't want people knowing about this. So he said, hold out the shawl you're wearing. She held it out while I measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her back. Then she got back to the town. She came to her mother-in-law, who asked, how is it with you, daughter? She told him all that the man had done for her. And she added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying to me, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And Naomi said, stay here, daughter, till you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. She says, okay, let's see what's going to be. And you can count on it. It's going to take, everything will be settled tonight. So now chapter 4, meanwhile, Boaz had gone to the gate and sat down there. In the ancient world, a lot of business, a lot of meetings and things took place at the city gates. And the archaeologists have found, indeed, in some of the diggings, that a lot of these city gates had some kinds of benches as part of the makeup that people could gather there and talk, do business, do the business of the town. So he says, he called, come over and sit down here, so-and-so. Okay, so I'm sorry. Meanwhile, Boaz had gone to the gate and sat down there. Now the Redeemer, whom Boaz had mentioned, passed by. He called, come over and sit down here, so-and-so. And he came over and he sat down. Now in Hebrew, it's Ploni Almoni. Now it is possible that that was his name. All right, could be. But it became a euphemism. It's like John Doe in English. Ploni Almoni becomes a Hebrew John Doe. If you don't have a name for somebody, it's Ploni Almoni or Ploni Ben Almoni. Right? And it is possible, remember I said at the very beginning, that the important people are mentioned by name. This guy, as we'll see in a minute, because he doesn't want to do the right thing, his name disappears. Then Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, be seated here. And they sat down. You have to have 10 people Zakanim, elders of this community, to serve as a court to what's going to transpire. He said to the Redeemer, Naomi now returned from the country of Moab, must sell the piece of land which belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. I thought I should disclose the matter to you and say, acquire it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you are willing to redeem it, redeem. But if you will not redeem, tell me that I may know, for there's no one to redeem but you, and I come after you. She says, look, you've got first right to purchase the land that belonged to Naomi's family. Normally the land would have gone to Elimelech's sons. They're dead. So Naomi basically has title to the land. So redeem it. You'll buy it from her, so it stays in the family. So the land stays part of the family. I talked about earlier when I said about the Jubilee year and about the sabbatical year. In the Jubilee year, lands are supposed to return to the original families that owned them. So the land would stay within the family. So he says, I am willing to redeem it, he replied. Boaz continued. So now he adds on. You were sort of like saying, no, wait, just a second. Don't go jump too fast. When you acquire the property from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate. This is not, get the land, but don't forget or know that you have to marry Ruth. And guess what? Ruth is a Moabite. So he says, the Redeemer replied, then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own estate. What exactly is he saying? It's not clear, but the implication is that if he were to marry Ruth, somehow there'd be something wrong with the family, the children come from it because she's a Moabite. All right, so he refuses it. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, this was for, you take over my right of redemption, for I am able to exercise it. Now, this was formerly done in Israel in cases of redemption or exchange. To validate any transaction, one man would take off his sandal and hand it to the other. Such was the practice in Israel. This is a parenthetical statement here explaining to people reading the Bible back whenever this was first compiled, explaining a custom that was no longer part of their custom. So it tells you that this story contains certainly elements that are very old, earlier than the time certainly when the Bible was pulled together, whatever stage of the game. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, acquire for yourself, he drew off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and to the rest of the people, you are witness today that I'm acquiring from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Machlon. I am also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Machlon, as my wife, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, and the name of the deceased may not disappear from among his kinsmen from the gate of his hometown. You are witnesses today. All the people at the gate and the elders answered, we are. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel. Prosper in Ephrathah and perpetuate your name in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. Now, once again, this paragraph has a lot in it that I have to unpack. If the kinsman, Ploni Almoni, couldn't marry Ruth, how is it that Boaz could? And the answer to that is Boaz knew something that Ploni Almoni didn't know. That it says in the Torah, Moavi, which is a male Moabite. A male Moabite cannot enter into the household of Israel. But a female Moabite, Moviah, may do so. He was aware that the ban was only on the men, not on the women. That's how the rabbis explained it. Okay? That therefore it was perfectly kosher for Ruth to enter the house of Israel and also to marry a nice Jewish boy. Well, in this case, not such a boy, an elderly man, really. And then they bless him by saying, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Now, if you remember the story in Genesis and Bereshit, Judah has 3 sons. Tamar, Judah marries off his eldest son to Tamar, and he dies. He marries the second son off to Tamar, and he doesn't do some nice things, right things, and he dies. He's got a third son. Judah says, well, let's wait a minute. Wait till he gets older, and then we'll arrange for the marriage. You go back to your home. So Tamar goes home. She's there. She sees that the third son is already grown up, old enough to get married to her, and Judah has done nothing about it. So she dresses up like a prostitute, and when Judah's going out to take care of the sheep, she sets up tent on a crossroads. Judah comes along, sees her, is interested in her, doesn't know who it is, goes into her, has sex with her. He leaves his staff and a signet ring with her in lieu of payment that a prostitute normally would, of course, need. No credit cards in those days. And when he sends his friend to go back with the kid that he promised, the goat, she's not there. Nobody knows what he's talking about. So then sometime later, it's evident that Tamar is pregnant. Tamar was sworn to at least a member of Judah's family, even if not specified which one it would be. The assumption was it was one of the brothers of the deceased. So Judah says she's acted as a whore, take her out to be burnt. And before that happens, she says, she sends to Judah the staff and the signet ring. He says, to whom these belong, that is the person who's the father of my child. She doesn't say Judah was. She doesn't want to save herself by embarrassing him in public. He recognizes her modesty in that way. The fact that what she did, even if it's a little bit hairy about how she went about doing it, was still kosher. Because now she's got a child that will carry on the name of her husband. And then she has 2 children. One of them is named Perez. Okay, so Perez is an offspring of Judah through that relationship, which was, it's not that it was horrible, but it wasn't really, the best in the world. But here it's, they obviously accepted it as being good, something she did nicely. Okay. So Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife, and he cohabited with her. The Lord let her conceive, and she bore a son. Sidebar, the rabbi said that Boaz married her, had cohabitated with her, and died. Happy man, but he died. And out of the story. All right, but she conceived, and the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not withheld a redeemer from you today. May his name be perpetuated in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain your old age. For he is born of your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons." Okay. Naomi took the child and held it to her bosom. She became its foster mother. And the women neighbors gave him a name, saying, "A son is born to Naomi." It's as if, where's Ruth in this? She sort of disappears from the scene. Naomi serves as it were, as the foster mother. They named him Oved. Oved means servant. It's one who serves somebody. Oved, he was the father of Jesse, father of David. This is the line of Perez. Perez begot Chetzron, Chetzron begot Ram, Ram begot Aminadav, Aminadav begot Nachshon, Nachshon begot Salmon, Salmon begot Boaz, Boaz begot Oved, Oved begot Jesse, Yishai, and Yishai begot David. End of the book of Ruth. So in the end, what we are told, and if you know in advance, Ruth is the ancestor of King David. So what we have here, there's, why is this story here? What it's all about? When was it composed? When was it compiled? David, when he becomes king of Israel, after the struggle with Saul and all of that, it's very clear that there was this idea that he does have a lineage from Moab. And some use that to attack him. And so the book of Ruth is, in a sense, a response to the attack upon David by saying, yeah, it's correct, you're right. He does come from that line, but look at the line that he came from. Here was this righteous, pious woman, gave up everything in Moab to follow her mother-in-law, who struggled to supply her with her needs, and brought about the ancestry of King David. There's nothing to be ashamed about in that. And so we have two episodes in the lineage of David, both of which have certain questions to it, but in the end, it was all for the good. Now, there's also another theory. When the Israelites returned, or the Jewish people returned from the Babylonian exile, at least those members that came back, not everybody came back, probably not a majority came back. But when they came back at the time of Ezra, the scribe, there was clearly a large number of at least the upper class who had married women of non-Jewish origin. And the book of Ezra speaks about having a whole to-do about it and trying to force them to divorce their non-Jewish wives and get rid of their non-Jewish children, etc. And so it is also theorized by some that maybe the book of Ruth is to contrast or to counter the story being told in Ezra, where Ezra seems to imply you can't have righteous converts to Israel. Whether or not they were not is not the question, but the book of Ruth is written to tell us, no, you do have in history such things. Ruth being one of them, and Ruth being the ancestress of King David. So the book of Ruth is clearly seen as the statement of a woman of kindness, of merciful attitude, who gave of herself to somebody else selflessly, a righteous convert, a memorial reminder to all of us of the holiday of Shavuot to accept upon ourselves the Torah, a reminder that it's what you do that's more important than who you are or where you came from. All of these are to be found in Megillat Ruth. So it is really a wonderful story, a powerful story, that one of the few cases in the biblical canon in which the women are the important elements, not the men. And the end of it is that this gives rise to King David, and thus ultimately gives rise to the Mashiach, the Messiah. And indeed, in Christian tradition, they have to trace the lineage of Jesus back to David as well, because otherwise he can't be the Messiah. Problem is, the lineage has always gone through the male, not the female. And if Joseph is supposedly not the father of Jesus, then whatever lineage he has doesn't make any difference, because he's not really the father. But that's why in the New Testament, they give the lineage of Mary as descending from King David to take care of that problem. Any questions tonight, ladies and gentlemen? I see. No? Nobody's got anything to say. I bored you to death tonight. I hope not too much. I love the book of Ruth. It's a great, great book, great story.
I did have a comment, Rabbi, a question/comment.
Sure.
You mentioned that at one point when Ruth gives birth to the son, Naomi takes over and Ruth, quote unquote, semi-disappears from a story. From what I was understanding, it kind of sounded like when you're saying, that the book is in the Torah to explain, that King David is, not a Moabite and everything else, it almost sounds as though because his father was raised by Naomi more so than by Ruth from this ending of the book, it almost makes him more like an emphasis on no, but King David's, ancestry was brought up in a Jewish household because the mother, quote unquote, that was taking care of the child was not really Ruth, but there's again emphasis on the Jewish mother.
Yeah,
That's kind of like a comment that I got from it.
that is certainly a possibility. And, since Naomi grew up Jewish and knew everything, and although she was, the things that Ruth might not know. One of the things that people convert to Judaism sometimes confront is when they have children that they're trying to raise Jewishly, and they don't have the background of what is done with Jewish parents should do, as it were, with their children. You can read books and take up all of that, and there are all kinds of advice things out there. But yeah, it's not quite the same reality. And so certainly that could be an element that you point out that really could be part and parcel of why they say that. The parents, does Rashi say anything on that? Because now the word omenet, which means like a nursemaid, this English translated as a foster mother. It can be just like the nurse and the nanny, as it were. But it's interesting, but we don't hear anything else about Ruth, though. That's just kind of a funny thing that's there. And then they say that the child is born to Naomi. Also, Yulad ben Naomi. The child is born to Naomi. And it kind of stops there with that, whatever the reason is. Anybody else? Yeah. Okay, everyone. Have a nice week. See everybody next week. Bye. Yes, and be well. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
You.
Bye.